She thought he was just a mechanic, until his son said, "He built the hospital you were born in." There are people who choose to live quietly, not because they have nothing to say, but because the weight of their story is too sacred to share with just anyone. In a sleepy town buried under winter snow, there's a man who fixes cars in a small garage at the edge of the road. He doesn't talk much, doesn't smile often, and most folks think he's just a simple mechanic. But what if I told you he once built the hospital you were born in? And what if the quiet life he lives now is not the whole story, but the beginning of something far deeper, far more human? This is not just a story about engines and tools. It's about loss, healing, and second chances, about how kindness can be loud without ever raising its voice, and how love, once broken, can still be built again, brick by brick, breath by breath. So if you're someone who believes that even the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary stories, you're in the right place. If this kind of storytelling touches your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you stories that matter. And who knows, the next one might just be your favorite. Now let me tell you about the man who fixed more than just cars. The wind rolled over the open stretch of road like it had something to prove. Snow flurries whipped against the windshield of Emily Carter's aging Subaru as she squinted through the grey afternoon haze, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her phone had lost signal 15 miles back, and the heater was doing little more than wheezing lukewarm air across the dashboard. "Just a little farther," she whispered, her voice the only sound besides the rhythm of the wiper blades. Hang. In there, she was almost home, if home could still be called that. She hadn't set foot in Maplewood in over 10 years. Her mother's recent health scare had been the thing to finally draw her back. A stroke, minor but frightening, followed by urgent calls from a neighbor and the weight of guilt she could no longer outrun. That was when she heard it, the unmistakable pop and thump-thump-thump of a tire blown to shreds. "Seriously?" she groaned, pulling to the shoulder just as the car lurched, surrendering to its fate. Snow crunched underfoot as she stepped out, bracing against the cold. Her boots sank into the powdery edge of the road. The tire on the passenger side was a goner, shredded and sagging like a burst balloon. She stared at it helplessly, then glanced around. Nothing, no other cars. Just bare trees, white fields, and an endless sky the color of dull metal. She fumbled for her phone, but it confirmed what she already knew: no service. Then she saw it. Across the road and a little way down, a hand-painted wooden sign that read Tom's Garage, repairs, towing, no appointments needed. It pointed down a gravel drive nearly hidden beneath the snow. Emily hesitated. The place looked rustic, but she didn't have much of a choice. The garage looked like it belonged in another time. Weathered wood, a tin roof, and an old bell that jingled as she pushed the door open. Warm air, thick with the scent of oil, rubber, and coffee, hit her like a blanket. She paused in the doorway. Stamping snow from her boots, a man stood beneath the raised hood of a truck, his back to her. He wore a faded denim shirt and oil-streaked overalls. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they belonged on someone who knew hard work intimately. "Be right with you," he called, voice low and even. Emily took in the space. Neat, surprisingly. Tools hung meticulously. Along the wall, everything in its place. A small wood-burning stove crackled in the corner, and next to it sat a table with 2 mugs, one still steaming. The man wiped his hands on a rag and turned toward her, and for a split second, she forgot why she was there. He was in his mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Dark hair with just enough grey at the temples to suggest time had taught him something. There was a stillness in his expression, like a man who didn't rush unless it mattered. His eyes, grey-blue and steady, met hers without flinching. "Car. Trouble?" he asked. "Flat tire," she said, suddenly aware of the wind battering the windows behind her. A few miles back. I couldn't reach anyone. You did now. He hung the rag over his shoulder and reached for his coat. Let's go take a look. He drove an old pickup that rumbled like it had seen a few things, but still had plenty to give. She sat in the passenger seat, cradling her fingers to warm them. I'm Emily, by the way, she offered. He nodded. Tom. Just that. No last name, no small talk. Just Tom. They reached her Subaru, and Tom worked in practiced silence. He didn't complain about the cold, didn't sigh or comment on the sorry state of her spare tire. He simply got to work, his breath puffing clouds into the frigid air. I'm in town for my mum, she said after a while, trying to fill the quiet. She's recovering from a stroke. Maplewood's a good place to heal, he said without looking up. You live here long? 7 years. You like it? He paused, gave a half smile. It's quiet. That was all she got. Back at the garage, he offered her coffee and she took it gladly, wrapping her hands around the mug. I can pay you, she said, fishing into her purse. Tom shook his head. Don't worry about it. She blinked. Seriously, you're not the first person stuck in a snowstorm out here. Probably won't be the last. She didn't know what to say to that. He had the kind of calm that made you feel like maybe everything wasn't falling apart. Maybe you weren't alone in the world, even if you'd felt that way for a long time. From the corner, a soft voice piped up. Hi. A boy stood in the doorway to the back office, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with sandy hair and curious eyes. He held a half-finished drawing in one hand and a juice box in the other. That's Nathan, Tom said, setting down his cup. Emily smiled. Hi, Nathan. Is that a picture you're drawing? The boy nodded and walked over, showing her. A lopsided house with a smiling sun and 2 stick figures. This is me and Dad, and that's the garage. It's beautiful, she said genuinely. The boy beamed. Do you fix cars too? She laughed. I'm afraid I don't. I'm a nurse. Nathan's eyes lit up. Nurses are nice. They helped my mom when she was sick. Tom's face shifted just slightly, a shadow crossing his features. Emily sensed the unspoken story behind those words, but didn't press. Well, she said, rising slowly, thank you for the rescue. Both of you. Tom walked her to the door. You know where we are if you need anything. Outside, the snow was still falling, but it felt somehow less bitter. As she got in her car and drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Tom stood in the doorway, watching the road. Not waving, not smiling, just standing there like a man who had seen too much and said too little. And for reasons she couldn't quite name, Emily felt like this wouldn't be the last time she'd see the man from the garage. The storm didn't let up that night. In fact, it deepened. Snow piled like frosting on rooftops and curled over mailboxes, erasing sidewalks and swallowing streets whole. The town of Maplewood fell into the kind of silence only heavy snow can bring, the hush of white stillness where time slows down. Emily sat by the window of her childhood home, nursing a mug of tea that had gone cold. Her mother, Ellen, was asleep in the next room, bundled beneath a quilt that Emily remembered from years ago, frayed at the edges but still warm. She watched as the flakes continued to fall, blanketing the front yard, and her thoughts drifted. Not to work, not to the city, not even to the hospital emails she was pointedly ignoring, but to the man at the garage. Tom. He hadn't been chatty, but there had been something in the way he looked at the world. Something quiet and steady. The way he spoke to his son, gentle but firm. The way he fixed her tire with care, not haste, like someone who understood how easily things could break, and how important it was to fix them right. She didn't know why he stuck in her mind, but he did. The next morning, the roads remained icy, and the town's plows were predictably behind. Emily wrapped herself in a thick coat and boots and walked 3 blocks to the diner she remembered from her youth, Maggie's place. The bell. Above the door jingled as she stepped inside, greeted by the scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee. Locals were huddled in booths, parkas draped over chairs, steam rising from ceramic mugs. Maggie herself, now greyer but still sturdy as ever, came around the counter and hugged Emily like no time had passed. "You're Ellen's girl, Aunt." "You?" she said, patting her shoulder. "She said you'd be coming back. Welcome home, honey." Emily smiled. "Thanks. It's strange being back." "That's the way of it. Maplewood doesn't change much, but we do." They talked for a while over coffee and pancakes, and before she left, Maggie added casually, "If your car acts up again, just take it to Tom down the road. He's good with engines, and he's got a good heart, even if he keeps it under a flannel shirt." Emily chuckled. "I've already met him." "Oh, you have?" Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Well then, I imagine you already know." "Know what?" But Maggie only smiled and went back to the kitchen. Later that afternoon, with nothing pressing to do and a gentle itch of curiosity that wouldn't go away, Emily found herself walking back to Tom's garage. She told herself it was just in case she needed anything checked with her car. But deep down, she knew better. The garage door was open this time. Inside, Nathan sat on an overturned milk crate, reading aloud from a picture book while Tom replaced the brakes on a rusted sedan. The boy's voice echoed slightly in the wide space, animated and warm. When Emily stepped in, both father and son looked up. "Aye," she said, tugging her gloves off. "I was just nearby." Tom stood, wiped his hands and nodded. "Everything okay with the car?" "Running fine," she said, a little embarrassed. "But I thought I'd say thank you again, and maybe see if you needed any help." Tom looked at her for a beat longer than necessary, like he was trying to decide something. Nathan solved the moment. "You can help me with reading." Emily smiled. "Deal." The hours passed without ceremony. Tom worked quietly on a Chevy with a heater that had stopped working. Emily sat with Nathan at a small desk in the corner, helping him sound out words and draw pictures in the margins. She noticed how the garage wasn't just a place of work. It was a kind of haven. On a shelf, a box labeled "Community Repairs" held envelopes with names scribbled in pen, repairs done for people who couldn't pay now, or maybe ever. A bulletin board near the coffee machine had flyers for lost pets, church bake sales, and handwritten notes, thanking Tom for everything from battery jumps to winter tire swaps. Tom didn't say much, but Emily watched him work. There was care in his movements, precise, almost meditative. His fingers moved with confidence, like they'd spent years building things from nothing. And then there were moments, small, fleeting ones that caught her off guard, like when he tousled Nathan's hair as he passed, or when he quietly slid a sandwich across the table to her at lunch, not asking if she was hungry, just knowing. Or when he gently adjusted the angle of a side mirror, whispering almost to himself, "There, that's better." He wasn't just fixing cars, he was tending to things, people, spaces, silences. As the sun began to dip behind the clouds and the day turned silver, Emily gathered her things to leave. "Thanks for letting me invade your day," she said. Tom shook his head. "Nathan enjoyed it. And I don't mind quiet company." She hesitated, then said, "You're good with him. A lot of dads wouldn't know how to do this alone." Tom didn't answer right away. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, eyes on the floor like he was weighing whether or not to speak. Finally, "I didn't know either, not at first, but you figure it out. One scraped knee, one school project, one bedtime story at a time." Something about the way he said it, low, almost reverent, made her chest tighten. "I should go," she said softly. He nodded, but before she turned to leave, Nathan called out, "You'll come back, right?" She looked at Tom, who didn't speak, but met her eyes with something close to hope. "I think I will," she said. And as she stepped into the evening light, flakes beginning to fall again, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her coat. Emily found herself returning to the garage more often than she'd meant to. Sometimes she told herself it was to make sure her car was holding up in the cold. Other times she claimed she was just taking a walk through town. But more and more, it was Nathan who drew her back. There was something about the boy that warmed her, like he'd inherited all the light his father had buried. One afternoon, the snow had melted just enough to reveal patches of the gravel path leading to Tom's garage. Emily stepped through the door with a container of cookies she'd baked, a little sheepishly. "Peace offering," she said as she held out the tin. Tom raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For hanging around so much. I thought mechanics might accept baked goods as currency." He gave the faintest smile. "That depends on the cookies." From the back office, Nathan's voice rang out. "Chocolate chip? Your favorite?" she called. He appeared moments later, arms flailing in mock excitement. "You brought cookies?" "Dad never makes cookies." Emily knelt to meet him at eye level. "That's because dads like yours fix cars and build things. It's an even trade." Nathan giggled and motioned for her to follow him. "Want to see my drawings?" Tom nodded slightly toward the back. "Go ahead." He's been working on something. The back room was small, cluttered with old blueprints, toolboxes, and books stacked in uneven piles. In the corner was a child-sized desk covered in paper and crayons. Nathan sat cross-legged on the floor, spreading out his collection like a young curator showing off a prized exhibit. "This one's the hospital," he said proudly, holding up a drawing of a square building with smiling stick people and a bright red cross. "I made it after Dad told me what he used to do." Emily blinked. "Your dad told you?" "Yeah. He used to build big buildings, like really big, hospitals and schools and stuff. But he doesn't do that now. He fixes cars. That's still cool, though." He paused, then added, as if it were an ordinary fact, "He built the hospital you were born in." Emily's breath caught. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "Sorry, what?" Nathan looked up at her, unfazed. "The hospital in Pine Ridge, right? Dad built that one. That's what Mom said. You said you were born there." Emily sat, slowly, on the edge of the little chair, heart pounding. "Your mom told you that?" He nodded, flipping to another drawing. "She used to be a nurse, too, like you. She said Dad built places that helped people, even if he never wanted anyone to know." Emily felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the quiet significance of what she'd just heard. She had always known the name Pine Ridge General Hospital, but never once wondered about the architect behind it. Never imagined that the man who had changed her tire in the snow had anything to do with something so monumental in her own life. Tom had never said a word. She glanced toward the garage, where he was bent over a car engine, sleeves rolled up, utterly absorbed in his work. A man who had built things that saved lives and now fixed old sedans in a small town, never saying a thing about what he'd left behind. That evening, as Emily was getting ready to leave, she lingered by the door longer than usual. Tom looked up from his clipboard. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Nathan mentioned something about Pine Ridge, about you." Tom was silent. "I was born in that hospital," she said softly. "I almost didn't make it. My mum told me they had to do an emergency delivery. The doctor said if the facility hadn't been so well equipped." She trailed off. Tom didn't look at her. "I didn't know," she continued, her voice trembling, "that you built it, designed it." "I didn't build it with my hands," he said quietly. "I just drew the lines. Others made it real." Emily took a step closer. "But those lines saved my life." He finally met her eyes. There was a weariness there, but also something deeper, something broken and buried, still breathing under the surface. "I used to think that made it all worth it," he murmured. "Until I lost her." Emily didn't need to ask who he meant. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything you lost." He gave a nod, the kind that carries years behind it. There was a silence between them, not heavy, but honest. Shared. Then, from the back, Nathan called, "Dad, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" Tom's lips quirked. Spaghetti again? It's my favorite, Nathan shouted. Tom looked at Emily. You like spaghetti? She smiled. Depends. Do I get more cookies if I say yes? He chuckled, the sound low and rare. You just might. And just like that, the moment lightened. But the weight of what Emily had learned stayed with her, tucked somewhere deep, like the first piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized was hers to finish. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew this. Tom wasn't just a mechanic, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done building things after all. The following week brought a rare stretch of clear skies, and with it the kind of fragile quiet that made winter in Maplewood almost beautiful. The snow, now crusted with a thin glaze of sunlight, glistened like sugared frosting across rooftops and tree branches. Emily had begun to settle into a rhythm, checking in on her mother each morning, reading old cookbooks or folding laundry while the radio murmured softly in the background. But no matter how she filled her hours, her thoughts always circled back to the garage, more specifically, to the man inside it. After what Nathan had told her, and after what Tom had not said, she couldn't stop wondering about what he'd been through, about what he'd built, about what he'd lost. So when Nathan called on the landline 2 days later and asked, "Do you want to come for dinner tonight? We're making spaghetti again, and Dad said it's your fault," she didn't hesitate. "I'll be there," she smiled. "Tell your dad I'll bring dessert." That evening, Tom opened the door before she even knocked. He stood there in a dark blue sweater, sleeves pushed up, the faintest smell of garlic trailing behind him. It caught her off guard. How different. He looked outside of grease-stained overalls. "How human. You made it," he said. She held up a foil-covered dish. "Peach cobbler. My mom's recipe. She insists it can win over even the grumpiest of mechanics." His mouth quirked. "I guess we'll find out." Inside, the kitchen was warm and homey in a way she hadn't expected. Simple, yes, but clean, lived in, full of little signs that a father and son had turned a house into something more than shelter. A collection of hand-drawn pictures lined the refrigerator, and a stack of Lego creations guarded the far corner of the room. Nathan was already at the table, spinning noodles onto his fork like a pro. "I saved you the good seat," he announced, gesturing to the chair beside him. Emily took her place, laughter already curling at the edges of her lips. Over dinner, they talked about small things. Nathan's spelling test, the time he and Tom accidentally dropped a muffler on Tom's foot, the best place to sled after a fresh snowfall. It was light conversation, filled with warmth that grew in subtle waves. But Emily noticed something else, too. Tom smiled, not often, not broadly, but now and then, when Nathan said something particularly silly, or when she teased him about overcooking the pasta, which he denied, that quiet, reluctant curve of his lips would appear. And when it did, it changed his whole face, like someone had cracked open a shutter and let sunlight in. She found herself watching for it, craving it even. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Nathan was building a spaceship out of blocks, while Emily and Tom sat on the old sofa, nursing mugs of tea. A soft tune played from the radio on the shelf, some forgotten country song humming about time and love and old pickup trucks. "You've made a nice life here," she said quietly. Tom didn't answer right away. He stared into his mug like it held a deeper truth. "I didn't plan to stay," he said eventually. "I came here just looking for space, for silence." But then Nathan started school, and people here, they don't ask too many questions. "You don't like questions?" "I don't like the ones I don't have answers to." Emily let that sit for a moment. "I think sometimes the best answers don't come in words anyway." He looked at her then, a long, steady look, not guarded, not open either, but something in between, like he was still deciding whether to let her pass the door he'd kept locked for years. "Nathan talks about you a lot," he said. "He doesn't warm up to people easy." "Neither do you," she said, then flushed. "Sorry, that was But Tom didn't look offended. In fact, that rare smile returned, slight, almost invisible, but unmistakably real. "You're not wrong," he said. Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, drifting softly past the windows, like confetti from a sky that had decided to celebrate something small and beautiful. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said after a while. Tom's posture tensed slightly, but he nodded. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Designing things, building." He didn't answer at first. The question seemed to pull something from deep within him. His fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "I miss what it used to mean," he said finally, "before it turned into something else." "What do you mean?" "When you build hospitals, you think you're creating safety, hope, a place where people walk in broken and walk out whole again. But then—" He stopped, the words caught in his throat. "But then sometimes they don't walk out at all," Emily finished softly. He looked at her, surprised. "I've worked in hospitals most of my adult life," she said. "I know that feeling. You give people the best care you can, and sometimes it's still not enough." He didn't speak, but something in his eyes shifted, like a brick quietly removed from a wall. "Maybe," she said gently, "you stopped building for others. But maybe now it's time to build something for yourself." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. As she rose to leave, Nathan ran up and wrapped his arms around her waist in a quick, spontaneous hug. "Come back soon, okay?" "I will," she whispered, brushing his hair back. Tom walked her to the door. Outside, the snow had coated the porch steps in a thin layer of white. "Be careful on the road," he said. She turned, met his eyes. "I always am." He hesitated, then said, "Thanks for coming. Thanks for letting me in." And with that, she stepped out into the night, heart lighter than it had been in years, smile lingering long after the door had closed behind her. Somewhere in the distance, wind rustled through pine trees and carried with it the softest echo of something that felt a lot like beginning again. It was a Saturday morning, thick with the promise of snow. The town had that quiet before the storm feeling, clouds low, air heavy with the scent of pine and impending weather. Emily stood in her mother's kitchen, tying the last knot on a scarf, as Ellen sipped tea and watched her daughter with a half-smile. "You've been spending a lot of time at Tom's garage," her mother said, not accusingly, but knowingly. Emily shrugged. "Nathan's sweet, he's always inviting me over, and it's nice being around people who don't expect anything from you." Ellen's eyes twinkled with something between amusement and hope. "You mean people like Tom?" Emily didn't answer, not out loud, but inside something warm and unsure stirred. That afternoon she found herself back at the garage, not for any real reason, not because the car needed fixing, but because the quiet of that space had started to feel more like comfort than escape. Tom was in the middle of replacing a timing belt when she arrived. Nathan was in the corner, head bent over a Lego kit, tongue poking from the side of his mouth in concentration. Emily sat down beside him. "What are we building today?" "A hospital," Nathan said matter-of-factly. Emily blinked. "Really?" He nodded. "Dad showed me one of the drawings he did a long time ago. It had this cool glass atrium in the middle and a garden. I'm trying to copy it." "You know your dad used to design buildings, right?" she asked. Nathan looked up from his work, eyes shining with pride. "Yeah, he was one of the best. Mom said he built places that helped people." Emily smiled softly. "He doesn't talk about it much." "He doesn't like to," Nathan said with the blunt honesty of a child. "It makes him sad sometimes, but I think it also makes him proud." He picked up a small block and added, "It to the roof. He built the hospital you were born in, you know." Emily froze. "What?" Nathan didn't look up. "Pine Ridge General, that's what you said, right? That's where you were born?" "Yes. Well, that's one of his Mom said she always thought it was funny because she worked there years later, and then she met Dad, and then I came. She used to say, your dad built the place you were born into the world, and then one day that same world gave you back to him. He paused, squinting at the tiny plastic windows. I didn't really get it, but it sounded nice. Emily couldn't breathe. She stared at the little hospital in progress, plastic blocks and childlike symmetry, and her mind reeled all this time. She had known Pine Ridge General as a fact of her own story, a location in the past. But to hear that, it had come from him, that Tom had once envisioned, designed and built the very space where she had taken her first breath. It felt like fate had drawn a silent circle around them. She stood slowly, legs a little unsteady. Nathan, did your dad ever talk about that? About Pine Ridge? The boy shrugged. Not really. He keeps his drawings in a box in the closet. Sometimes he looks at them late at night when he thinks I'm asleep. Her heart squeezed. What happened to your mom? She asked gently. Nathan's fingers paused on a Lego brick. She got really sick, and then she didn't come home. Dad told me sometimes people's bodies get tired, even when their hearts don't want to stop. Emily knelt down, touched his arm. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. He nodded like he understood more than any child should. Dad doesn't smile much anymore, he said quietly. But when you're here, sometimes he does. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, unbidden. She stepped out into the cold for air. Heart hammering, breath misting in front of her. The garage door creaked open behind her. You okay? She turned. Tom was wiping his hands on a rag, concern written across the lines of his face. Did you really build Pine Ridge? She asked. He froze. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. Nathan talks too much. No, he speaks from the heart. Tom looked away, eyes tracking the bare trees beyond the road. I did. It was one of the last projects I led. I poured everything into it, wanted it to feel like light, like healing could walk the halls with you. Emily's throat tightened. I was born there. Emergency delivery. They told my mom I almost didn't make it, that the facility saved us both. Tom didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. Then maybe it was worth it after all. You don't talk about it. Why? Because it hurts. He swallowed hard. Because I spent years building places I thought could shelter people from pain. But when the woman I loved most in the world needed saving, I couldn't build fast enough. Emily stepped toward him, arms folded against the wind. You couldn't save her, but you've saved so much more than you know, including me. His eyes flicked up, locking onto hers. Something raw and fragile flickered there. A man standing, at the edge of memory, holding on with both hands. Tom, she whispered, you didn't stop building, you just forgot who it was for. Snow began to fall again, slow, quiet flakes tumbling like ash from a sky full of secrets. Tom didn't speak, but he didn't turn away either, and in that stillness, something changed. A door creaked open, not fully, but just enough for the light to start pouring in again. The snow didn't stop falling for 2 days. Schools closed, roads iced over. Maplewood became a quiet, frozen pocket of time where people stayed indoors and the world outside softened under a thick, white hush. Emily spent the days caring for her mother, sipping tea by the window and trying unsuccessfully not to think about Tom, but his name kept echoing in her thoughts, his hands so gentle yet certain, his voice always quiet but steady, the way he spoke about his past, as if every word cost him more than he wanted to admit. And the words Nathan had said, still hanging in her memory like a quiet bell, he built the hospital you were born in. What kind of man carried that kind of legacy in silence, and why? On the 3rd day, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and the snowplows rumbled through the town's arteries, Emily found herself standing at the Maplewood Public Library. The same small brick building she remembered from childhood, though the paint was more faded now, and the carpet carried the weight of decades. She didn't really know what she was looking for, only that her heart wouldn't rest until she understood. The librarian, a kind-faced woman in her 60s named Sharon, recognized Emily right away and welcomed her with a warm smile. "Looking for anything in particular, hon?" Sharon asked. "I'm trying to find information about an architect," Emily said, lowering her voice. "Tom Bennett." Sharon's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she said nothing judgmental. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Give me a second." She disappeared into the back room. A few minutes later, she returned with a slim folder labeled Archive, Bennett T. in faded ink. Emily sat at one of the corner tables, the folder in front of her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, magazine excerpts, a couple of architectural journal features. Each told a piece of a story she hadn't expected to find. Thomas Bennett, age 27, wins National Design Award for Rural Medical Facility in Arizona. Architect behind Pine Ridge. General, a visionary blending modern. Efficiency with human warmth. I want people to walk in and feel like they matter. Interview with Thomas Bennett, architect of hope. Photo after photo. Tom, 10 years younger. Eyes brighter, but still intense. Standing beside hospital renderings, walking through construction sites, shaking hands with doctors, smiling at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He had once been celebrated, respected, admired, a rising star. Until abruptly, the article stopped. The last entry was a small notice in a trade journal, dry and clinical. Thomas Bennett, one of the most promising young minds in healthcare architecture, has stepped down from Bennett plus Marks following personal circumstances. His current whereabouts are unknown. No scandal, no controversy, just a man who disappeared. Emily closed the folder slowly, heart pounding. He hadn't just left a job, he had walked away from a legacy. That evening, with the sky turning the color of slate, Emily stood in front of Tom's garage again. This time, she didn't wait to be invited. She walked in, carrying the folder, and found Tom wiping down a workbench, oil on his hands, his back to her. "I went to the library today," she said quietly. Tom stiffened but didn't turn. "I saw the articles, the awards, the designs. You were incredible." He set the rag down slowly. "I was good at drawing lines," he said. "That doesn't make me incredible." "You weren't just drawing lines, Tom. You were changing lives." He finally turned to face her, eyes unreadable. "Then why does it feel like none of it mattered?" Emily stepped closer, the folder in her hands, like a question she didn't know how to ask. "You built spaces where people were saved, where I was saved. That matters, Tom. Just because one terrible thing happened doesn't erase all the good that came before it." His jaw tightened. "I couldn't save her, Emily. All those buildings, all that planning, and when the woman I loved most was dying, I couldn't do a damn thing." "You're not a doctor," she said gently. "I was supposed to give her a place that was safe, a place where she could be safe. She didn't need a building, Tom. She needed you, and you were there. You're still here. You're raising your son with kindness. You're helping strangers in snowstorms. I'm no one," he said sharply. "Not anymore." His voice cracked, and for the first time Emily saw it, not just the grief, but the guilt, the way it had carved him hollow. The way it had convinced him that to suffer was to atone, that to disappear was somehow righteous. She stepped forward, closer now. "You can't build a life out of guilt, Tom. You can only build it out of love." Silence stretched between them. Long and raw, then his voice quieter. "I don't know how anymore." Emily reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "Then maybe let someone help you remember." He looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, There was a flicker of something in his eyes not shadowed by the past. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but maybe permission to try. And for Tom Bennett, that was something. Later that night, back at home, Emily opened the folder again. She pulled out one particular image, a photograph of Pine Ridge General at sunrise. Light blooming through its glass windows, golden and soft. She traced the caption with her fingertip, "Designed by a man who believed buildings could heal." She smiled. He hadn't stopped healing people. He just needed someone to remind him. And maybe in doing so, she was healing too. Tom didn't come by the house the next day, nor the day after. Emily tried not to read too much into it, but the silence echoed louder than she expected. It wasn't anger she felt from him. Not exactly. But she knew she had stirred something that had been buried for a long time. And people don't always thank you for unburying the things they've learned to live with. She found herself pacing the small kitchen while her mother dozed in the next room. Her fingers itched to call, to stop by the garage, to do something. But instead, she waited. And then, on the third evening, just as the sun began to dip below the snowy ridge behind the neighborhood, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Tom standing there. His coat dusted with snow, eyes tired, but steady. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied, heart pounding gently. "Come in?" He hesitated. "Could we take a walk instead?" Emily grabbed her scarf and coat without question. The road was quiet, lined with trees heavy with snow. They walked side by side, their boots crunching softly beneath them. The kind of silence between them was not uncomfortable, but not casual. Either it was a silence that waited for permission. Finally, Tom spoke. "I wanted to thank you," he said, eyes straight ahead, "for what you said the other night. You don't need to thank me. I do." He glanced at her. "You said some things I needed to hear, even if I didn't want to hear them." Emily nodded slowly. "Sometimes the hardest words are the ones meant for healing." He chuckled softly. "You and Nathan both. You say things like that, like you know the shape of what hurts." "I'm a nurse," she said gently. "I've spent most of my life walking beside people who were in pain. Sometimes physical, sometimes something deeper. It teaches you to listen to more than what people say out loud." They walked a bit further, past the white-steepled church and the frozen pond where kids would skate when the weather was cold enough. The street lamps flickered on, as if to light the next step of their conversation. "She was 32, Tom said suddenly. "Her name was Rachel." Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had this laugh, he continued, voice softer, now more distant. It would catch in her throat when she found something really funny. Not graceful, not polished, but pure. She laughed like she meant it. Emily smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I would have liked." "She was stronger than me in 1,000 ways," he said. "Brighter, softer too. We met at a design conference, of all places. She was a nurse there to give a talk about patient-centered care. I was a cocky young architect who thought hospitals were about structure. She told me they were about people." He paused. "I changed everything after I met her, every blueprint, every design. I started thinking about window placement for recovery, rooms, how light fell in pediatric wards. I designed buildings to make people feel human again, because of her." Emily felt her chest tighten. There was so much tenderness in his voice, and pain. "She got sick?" she asked softly. "Breast cancer, aggressive. We fought it, we moved cities, tried every trial, every treatment, but it was fast. She was gone in less than 10 months. He swallowed hard. Nathan was 4. I didn't know how to breathe without her. And suddenly, all the places I'd built to save others felt like they'd failed me. He stopped walking, turned to face her. I walked away. I didn't just lose her, I lost who I was. I couldn't design hospitals when the only one I wanted to save had died inside one, so I left it all behind, moved here, found a garage that needed work, and I kept my head down. Emily reached out, gently touching his arm, And in doing that, you saved your son. Tom looked down at her hand. I did my best. You did more than that, Tom. He's kind, bright. He trusts people. That doesn't happen by accident. He shook his head slowly. Sometimes I think he's the only thing I got right. Emily didn't speak. Instead, she gently slid her hand into his, fingers threading through his with a quiet, wordless grace. He looked at her, surprised, but didn't pull away. Pain doesn't mean you failed, she whispered. It means you loved deeply. And that love doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of what you build next. Tom blinked, as if trying to hold back something unspoken. The wind moved gently around them, carrying with it the sound of distant wind chimes. I don't know how to build anymore, he said. She squeezed his hand. Then let's start small. He studied her for a long moment, and then, for the second time since they'd met, Tom Bennett smiled. Not a fleeting flicker, but something more real, more rooted. And in that moment, the road behind them seemed to blur. The silence no longer felt like a burden, and the wounds they didn't talk about, maybe, just maybe, were beginning to breathe again. Maplewood's annual winter festival arrived like a slow exhale after weeks of quiet snow and grey skies. Strings of warm white lights curled along storefronts. Wreaths hung on every lamppost, and the town square had been transformed into a quaint winter village with wooden booths, fire pits, and the smell of cinnamon and pine drifting in the air. Emily stood beside her mother on the front porch, buttoning her coat as Ellen adjusted her scarf. "You're going with Tom and Nathan?" her mother asked, a soft teasing in her voice. Emily smiled. "I am." Ellen looked at her, eyes thoughtful. "You look happy, Em. Happier than I've seen you in a long time." Emily didn't answer right away, because happiness wasn't quite the word. What she felt was steadiness, a warmth that came not from fireworks or passion, but from something slower, quieter, like heat rising from an old stove. It was the feeling of finally being seen, and maybe even more startlingly, of seeing someone else fully. She gave her mother's hand a squeeze. "I am. I think I really am." Tom pulled up just after sunset, his old pickup washed and dusted with new snow. Nathan waved excitedly from the back seat, wearing a red knit hat and clutching a paper lantern he'd made in school. "You ready for hot cocoa and ice sculptures?" he called out the window. Emily climbed in, laughing. "Lead the way, Mr. Tour." "A guide." Tom glanced at her with a smile, one that had become easier, more natural since their walk. "He's been talking about this for weeks." "And what about you?" she teased. "You excited?" He raised an eyebrow. "I'm a mechanic. Festivals aren't exactly my natural habitat. But you're here." He looked ahead at the road. "That's because some things are worth showing up for." Emily didn't respond, but she felt her heart flutter, warm and light. The town square buzzed with soft music and the crunch of boots on snow. Children ran between booths with painted faces and candy canes. Couples stood by fire barrels, sipping cider. A quartet played gentle jazz beneath a canopy of lights that glittered like stars trapped in branches. Nathan tugged them toward a wooden stall where a man carved a block of ice into a reindeer. The boys' eyes lit with wonder. Tom stood quietly beside Emily, hands tucked into his coat pockets, gaze following his son. "He gets that awe from Rachel," he murmured. She could see magic in things most people missed. Emily turned to him. "And he's not the only one." He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "You fix engines, Tom, but you also fix people, whether you mean to or not." He gave a small smile, then looked away. "I don't always know what I'm doing." "None of us do," she said. "But the ones who keep showing up, that's the difference." Just then, Nathan came running back with 2 steaming cups of cocoa. "One for each of you," he declared. Tom took his with a nod. Emily smiled as she wrapped her fingers around the warmth. Nathan pointed toward the far end of the square. "They're lighting the lanterns soon. Can we stay and watch?" Tom looked at Emily. "What do you think? I think we'd be crazy to miss it." The lantern release was Maplewood's most beloved tradition. Hundreds of paper lanterns, each carrying a handwritten wish or memory, released into the sky at once. Emily, Tom, and Nathan stood together near the edge of the crowd, their breath misting in the cold night air. Nathan held his lantern close to his chest. "Did you write something?" Emily asked him. He nodded. "I wrote, 'I hope my dad smiles more.'" Tom looked down, startled. Nathan met his gaze. "You used to smile with Mom. I want to see that again." Emily's eyes stung. She glanced at Tom, whose face had gone still, too still. Then he knelt in front of his son, resting a hand gently on Nathan's shoulder. "I'm trying," he said softly. "I really am." Nathan wrapped his arms around his dad's neck and hugged him tight. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, pressing his face into the boy's knit hat. When he looked up again, something in him had changed. Slightly, subtly, but clearly. A door cracked further open. A weight lightened. He stood and handed Emily a lantern of her own. "You want to make a wish?" he asked. She stared at the blank paper square, heart pounding. Then she wrote, "Let him believe he deserves another chance at happiness." When she looked up, Tom was watching her, not reading her words, but seeing her. And somehow, it felt like he already knew. The lanterns rose all at once, hundreds of golden lights lifting into the dark, snowy sky. The crowd hushed. Children gasped. Music swelled in the background, soft and slow, like something sacred. Emily felt Tom's hand brush against hers. She didn't move. Then his fingers laced into hers, quiet and sure. They stood that way, eyes skyward, watching the lights drift higher and higher, each one carrying grief and hope and memory and the unspoken prayers of everyone who'd ever wished for one more beginning. As the last lantern disappeared into the stars, Emily turned to him. "You smiled," she whispered. Tom looked at her, and this time his smile was wide, honest, real. "I guess I did." The Monday after the festival brought a quiet snowfall and a certain hush that seemed to linger long after the lanterns had faded from the sky. Emily stood in the garage, holding a tray of muffins she had baked with her mother that morning. Tom was out back with a customer, and Nathan was hunched over his Lego table in the corner, building what looked like an elaborate spaceship hospital hybrid. "I made a landing pad," he explained proudly. "For patients who come from other planets." Emily grinned. "That's very considerate of you." Nathan beamed, then asked, "Can you help me find the little red piece with the window?" She agreed and began searching a nearby shelf where Tom kept extra boxes of odds and ends, screws, zip ties, mismatched bolts, and things labeled in handwriting that was half print, half mechanical precision. While looking, she knocked over a small, narrow shoebox. Its contents spilled across the floor. Old keys, a Polaroid of Tom, and a woman with a warm laugh frozen mid-frame, and a bundle of envelopes tied together with string. Nathan didn't notice, still buried in Lego pieces. Emily hesitated, then reached to gather the items. One envelope slid free from the stack and landed face up. It was addressed in Tom's handwriting to Rachel. "In case I ever forget how to say the things I should." Emily froze. Her fingers hovered over the letter. It wasn't hers to read. She knew that. But something about the weight of it, the years pressed into the folds, the sadness tucked beneath the ink, held her still. She wasn't prying. She wasn't trying to uncover secrets. She just wanted to understand. And so, with a breath that trembled, she opened it. "Rachel, I don't know where to begin tonight except to say, I still look for you, in the quiet, in the ache, in the space beside me when I'm pretending not to cry. Nathan asked me today if I still dream about you. I told him no, that was a lie. I dream about you every time I close my eyes. Your laugh, your hands, The way you whispered his name the first time you held him. You looked so tired that day, and still more alive than I've ever seen anyone. Do you know what it's like to build a place meant to save lives, and then lose yours inside it? I walk past the mirror sometimes and don't recognize the man there. He smiles less, talks less, loves less. He looks like someone who forgot how to hope, and maybe I did. But Nathan's growing, and he's good. God, Rachel, he's good. He asks questions you would laugh at and hugs without reason. He misses you, but he carries pieces of you that I can't. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying, and when I can't try for me, I try for him. I hope that's enough. Love always, Tom. Emily closed the letter slowly. Her eyes were full, her throat thick. It was the rawest thing she had ever held, not just words, but grief distilled. A map of a heart broken in silence, rebuilding itself with nothing but fatherhood and memory. She gently retied the string around the letters, careful not to fold the pages too harshly. Then she tucked them back into the shoebox and returned it to the shelf, just as Tom stepped back inside, wiping snow from his shoulders. "Customer with a frozen battery," he said. "It's that time of year." Emily turned, unsure whether. Her face still betrayed the emotion behind her eyes. Tom looked at her for a long second. Something in his gaze sharpened, quiet but perceptive. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, just thinking." He didn't press, but she noticed the way his shoulders tensed, the way his glance briefly flicked toward the shelf where the shoebox sat. He knew, and still, he said nothing. That night, after dinner, Emily lingered as Nathan went to brush his teeth and get ready for bed. Tom stood by the sink, drying dishes while she watched him, heart full. "Do you miss her every day?" she asked softly. He didn't turn, but his hands slowed. "Yes," he said. "Some days it's like a shadow. Other days it's like drowning." "I read your letter," she whispered. He froze. "I didn't mean to. It fell out of a box. I should have put it back right away. I'm sorry." For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he turned, towel in hand, and met her gaze, not angry, not defensive, just bare. "I wrote those letters to keep breathing," he said. "When talking out loud felt like betrayal." "I understand," she said, "more than you think." He searched her face. "Do you?" She stepped closer. "Yes, because I've been carrying my own shadows too. I lost a patient once, a child. I tried everything, but sometimes medicine doesn't reach deep enough." She took a breath. "I stopped nursing for almost a year, couldn't walk into a hospital without shaking. I didn't talk about it, not even with my mom. I just carried it, alone." Tom looked at her, really looked at her, like he saw not just her now, but her then. "I guess we both forgot how to ask for help," he murmured. "Maybe," she said, "but maybe we don't have to anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, but not with grief this time, with possibility. Tom reached for her hand, and this time when she took it, he didn't let go. It started with a sketch, a quiet morning, a warm mug of coffee, and an empty page. Tom sat at the small kitchen table while Nathan played on the floor and Emily stirred oatmeal on the stove. The snow had begun to melt in Maplewood, leaving behind muddy sidewalks and soft fog that clung to windows like breath. He didn't intend to draw. The pencil had been resting beside the mail. The notebook was something Nathan had left open. Pages filled with rockets and robots and buildings shaped like clouds. But then, without thinking, Tom picked up the pencil and began to move his hand. Lines, curves, a central hallway, wide windows. Facing east, a small exam room, a waiting area filled with light. Emily glanced over her shoulder and stilled. "Is that?" she asked. He didn't look up. A clinic? Small, just 4 rooms, but with a walk-in entrance and a family corner. For Maplewood, Tom gave a slow nod. We lost the nearest clinic 2 years ago when they closed the county branch. People have to drive 40 minutes now for something simple. It's stupid. This town deserves better. Emily set the spoon down, walked over and stood behind him. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. "You're building again," she said softly. Tom let out a breath. "I guess I am." And for the first time, it didn't feel like a betrayal of Rachel's memory. It felt like a continuation of it. She had believed in healing, and maybe so did he. Over the next few weeks, the blueprint grew. In shape, in detail, and in spirit. Tom worked on it in the evenings after closing the garage. Sometimes Nathan sat beside him, drawing his own ideas. "You should make the exam table shaped like a race car." And sometimes Emily would quietly bring tea and read beside him in silence. It wasn't just a clinic, it was a promise. To the town, to Rachel, to himself, and to a future he wasn't afraid of anymore. The town council meeting was held on a rainy Thursday evening inside the community center. Tom hadn't stood in front of a crowd in nearly a decade, but that night he did. Blueprint in hand, heart pounding. "I know I haven't always been visible," he began, "but I've lived here for 7 years. I've seen what this town gives and what it needs, and what it needs is basic care close to home." He unfolded the design. Simple, elegant, efficient, human. There's an empty lot beside Maggie's diner. It's town-owned. I want to offer my time and labor to build a walk-in clinic there, one that serves this community without red tape. I'll donate the design. I'll lead the build. I'm not asking for money. Just permission and a little trust. There was silence. Then Maggie stood from the back. "I trust you, Tom Bennett," she said, "and I think this town should too." Applause followed. Not thunderous. Maplewood wasn't that kind of place, but real, steady, and enough. Enough to say yes. That night, back at the garage, Emily found Tom standing at the doorway, looking out at the wet pavement glistening under the streetlight. He didn't say anything, so she walked up beside him and simply said, "You did it." He turned to her. "No," he said, "we did." She blinked, surprised. He continued, "You reminded me what I'd forgotten. That building isn't just about steel and wood. It's about faith, in people, in tomorrow." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded square of paper, slightly worn at the edges. It was her lantern wish. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "You read it?" Nathan found it, thought it was mine. He paused. "I almost didn't read it, but I'm glad I did." He stepped closer. "Emily, I'm not good at this. I don't know what comes next, but I do know I want to build something with you, whatever it is, wherever it goes." Her breath caught. "Even if it's not perfect?" she asked, voice trembling. "I'm done chasing perfect," he said. "I want real." And then, for the first time, he reached for her, not tentatively, not by accident, but fully, with both hands and his whole heart. She stepped into him, and together they stood in the open doorway of the place where engines had been repaired, hearts had been mended, and blueprints of the soul had begun again. 3 weeks later, a wooden sign was staked into the frozen ground on the empty lot beside the diner. The paint was still wet, the corners still raw, but the words were clear: "Future home of Maplewood Community Health, designed with care, built with love." Tom stood beside it with Nathan on his shoulders and Emily's hand in his. And in that moment, he realized he wasn't just building a clinic. He was building a life again. Spring came slowly to Maplewood. The snow melted in patient streams down the gutters, revealing sidewalks cracked with time and yards that dared to green again. Flower boxes appeared on windowsills. The diner brought back its picnic tables. And the town, like a bear shaking off hibernation, stretched its arms and looked toward the sun. So did Tom Bennett. He stood beside the rising foundation of the clinic, wooden frames now reaching up like ribs ready to hold a heart. Volunteers came. Each morning, retirees, young dads, 2 teens from the high school trade class. Maggie brought muffins. Pastor John dropped off coffee, and every day Emily was there, clipboard in one hand, hammer in the other, laughing louder than she had in years. Nathan painted a Future Kids Corner sign and taped it to the window frame. Life, it seemed, was being rebuilt, not all at once, not perfectly, but truthfully, one beam at a time. On a quiet Sunday, with construction paused and the sun warm enough to coax people outside, Tom asked Emily to come by the garage. Just her. She arrived with wind in her hair and a question in her smile. "Everything okay?" He nodded, but he looked nervous. Not in the way people do when something is wrong, but in the way they do when something matters. He led her through the garage, past the familiar tools and smudged windows, to the back office where she'd once read with Nathan, and found that a letter, but something had changed. The walls were painted now, soft, welcoming colors, a row of small blueprints framed above a desk, and there, beside a lamp, sat a box, wooden, hand-carved. Tom opened it and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The original sketch of the Maplewood Clinic. Not the finished rendering, not the final version, the first lines. "These were the first lines I drew," he said. "The night I realized I wanted to live again." He handed it to her. "I want you to have it." Emily blinked, taken aback. "Tom," he took a breath. "I used to think my life ended when Rachel's did, that everything after was just survival. But then you came, and you didn't try to fix me. You just stood beside me. And somehow, without knowing it, you helped me remember who I was, and who I still want to become." Emily looked at him, eyes shining. "You rebuilt yourself, Tom. I just reminded you that you could." He smiled, the kind of smile that had once been rare but now came easier. "You're part of every nail, every beam in that new building, and every part of this new life. If you'll have me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small key. She laughed gently. "A key?" "It's for the garage," he said, a little shy. "For the front door, for the shop, for all of it." She stared at him. He added softly, "It's a place where things get repaired. I figured maybe we could keep fixing things together." Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Not rushed, not hesitant, just full of trust, of hope, of love born not from fairy tales but from real life. Messy, beautiful, earned love. And in the quiet of the garage, where grief had once lived and healing had now taken root, Tom closed his eyes and held her close. Weeks later, under a soft summer sky, the clinic opened its doors. People came, old, young, familiar, new. Emily stood by the reception desk in soft blue scrubs, greeting each patient like family. Nathan handed out lollipops from a basket, and Tom, in clean jeans and a flannel shirt, walked the halls he had drawn, watching them fill with life. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor asked Tom if he wanted to speak. He stepped up to the small platform, cleared his throat, and looked out at the town that had once been his hiding place, now his home. "I used to build places for other people," he began, "hospitals, clinics, spaces that held strangers' stories. But then I lost someone, and I stopped building." He looked toward Emily and Nathan, who stood beneath the new sign bearing his name in small, unassuming print. "But somewhere along the way, I realized it's not about what we lose. It's about what we do with what's left." He paused, letting the silence settle like good earth. This place was built by a town that believed again, in itself, in each other, in second chances. And I'm proud to be part of that. He smiled, small but strong. "Let's keep building." The crowd clapped, but more than that, they understood. That night, After the crowds had left, Tom sat with Emily and Nathan on the clinic steps. Fireflies blinked in the grass. The air smelled of sawdust and wildflowers. Nathan leaned sleepily against his dad's arm. "Did we do good, Dad?" Tom smiled down at him. "We did real good, buddy." Emily looked up at the stars. "So what now?" Tom thought for a moment, then said, "Now we live." And they did. Not perfectly, but fully and always together. In the garage where love was repaired. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you from a small town like Maplewood, or maybe a big city where stories like this still manage to find a home in your heart? Leave us a comment below. We read everyone, and your thoughts truly mean the world to us. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, filled with love, healing, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you never miss a new story. From our little storytelling corner to wherever you are in the world, thank you for spending your time with us. Your presence here is a gift. Until next time, take care of your heart and the hearts around you.